Thanks for downloading this edition of The Why Factor, a program that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it. It's been a very, very long time since I saw one of these microfiche readers. When I was younger, newspapers were often archived on these things. I see a man just looking back through some old record. You've got to put the film in and spin it round by hand. It looks so archaic.
Well, gradually they will be replaced, and that everything that's been on microfilm to conserve it will presumably be digitised at some point. And that's where we're in the transition stage, where it's gradually being put online.
BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams with The Why Factor. This is the Family History Library at the Society of Genealogists in central London, a room filled with technology, old and new, mostly old. There are people poring over ancient documents here, searching for a name or a date which might help reveal the identity of an ancestor. This week, why are so many of us obsessed with our family tree, and what are we really looking for?
I always say, if you've got the kind of mind that likes detective stories and puzzles, it's the same kind of feeling that you get when you put that difficult piece of sky in on the jigsaw puzzle.
Elsa Churchill is the genealogist here. She spent more than 30 years researching family histories. We've always told stories about our own origins, but this study, genealogy, is a growing phenomenon, driven by the digitisation of old paper records, websites offering to test the DNA in your saliva for $100, and TV shows like Who Do You Think You Are, which explore the family histories of celebrities.
It's the same gotcha feeling. So it's following the buzz of a detective paper trail. And I just think it's curiosity, and it's fun, it's interesting.
You could think about it in terms of people's anxiety about mortality, so that the sense that you do locate yourself.
Catherine Nash is Professor of Human Geography at Queen Mary, University of London.
You might also think about it's tied to a wider interest in documenting your existing life, so people having a sense that what they do in their social life becomes meaningful and sort of concrete and fixed and captured if they record it digitally, photographs, share it with others. So I think there are parallels between that wider effort to capture life, the detail of your life and share it, with this effort to capture and know yourself through your genealogy, as a way maybe to allay an anxiety that your life will be lost and unknown for the future.
It's the first thing kids want to know about. When they're little, they want to know the stories of their mummies and their grandparents and things like that. And once they're old enough, maybe they've got married and started having kids again themselves, then they'll come back and start asking questions. And then there's the thing that I think that introduces most people into family history. They lose a loved one. They lose that connection to be able to ask the questions for, what did grandma know? What did grandma do? And normally when you get together at grandma's funeral, you start talking about it, and then things come out, and then people just start getting curious.
I've never really been very curious about my own ancestry, but that's changing a little as I get older. I wonder if it's wanting my son to know a little more about his family tree when I've gone. So because of that and this programme, I've been going through these old yellowing pages, certificates of births, marriages and deaths. The Williamses on my father's side, and on my mother's, the Heinos. It's a name that we think comes from Finland. And if I look at this document here, it's a copy of the Census of England and Wales 1911. You can see my grandfather, the son, and his father, the head of the household, Michael Heino, or Mikael Heino, who, the family law has it, jumped ship and ended up in Liverpool. So we can trace that side of the family back as far as Mikael. But after that, the trail goes cold. Do you think there's a problem with our looking backwards constantly at our origins?
Especially when we concentrate so much on the genetics of it, there's a tendency not to bring people together, but to divide people.
Nathan Lentz is Professor of Molecular Biology at John Jay College in New York. He's a molecular biologist who thinks that we place too much emphasis on molecular biology, too much emphasis on our genes.
It brings up arguments about who has a proper ownership of a certain patrimony, of a certain genetic legacy, when it really is a cultural legacy that we should be focusing on, I think. And you see these played out sometimes in the political stage where, like, for example, Elizabeth Warren was challenged on her Native American ancestry because was it 1/16th ancestry from Native Americans or was it 1/32nd? Because we've drawn this sort of arbitrary line along that.
My mom and dad were very much in love with each other, and they wanted to get married. And my father's parents said, absolutely not. You can't marry her because she's part Cherokee and she's part Delaware.
Elizabeth Warren is an American academic and Democratic senator for Massachusetts.
After fighting it as long as they could, my parents went off. They eloped. It was an issue in our family the whole time I grew up about these two families. It was an issue still raised at my mother's funeral.
The reason why a lot of Americans want to take pride in Native American ancestry is a bit of trying to put a positive spin on a very dark period in our past. The way that we treated, the Europeans anyway, treated the Native Americans was deplorable. But if we can claim a little bit of that Cherokee blood, for example, we sort of get to absolve ourselves of the horrors and take fellowship with those that we now want to revere as honorable men and women. And that's totally arbitrary. That's totally false. Those who live in First Nations communities have the right to that cultural patrimony because they've kept those traditions alive and they've kept that cultural unity. And I don't care if they're 1/2, 1/32nd, because it's the cultural legacy that really has the value of these stories.
Doing genealogy can actually mess up the idea of genealogical purity for a group. So in Northern Ireland, for example, people doing genealogy often discover their genealogies include Catholics and Protestants, even if these groups are sometimes thought of as completely distinct and often opposed. And this is why, actually, some community workers in Northern Ireland have encouraged people to do genealogy there, because it really is a very personal way of thinking about their own past, recognising that complexity and challenging the neatness of those categories of Irish and British in Northern Ireland, and a constructive way of thinking about those complexities. On the one hand, we're often told that humanity is a global genetic family tree with shared origins, and that somehow by thinking of ourselves in that way, thinking of us as in terms of our genetic similarity and shared ancestry, we can imagine a universal solidarity. So we're all part of one big, unified and happy family. But what's always troubled me is whether this implies that there's actually less natural basis for connection or care between people who are less connected through genealogy, less connected in terms of shared ancestry, and in fact more genetically different.
Last week I sent you some details about what little I know of my family tree. There's a Welsh half, the Williamses. On the other side, my mother's side, are the Hainos or the Hainos, which we think come from Finland. You've had a look for me. What have you found there?
Well, we work back generation by generation, looking at your father and your grandfather, and the person you thought was the first person with that surname living in Liverpool. You think he's the one that jumped ship. And
apparently so, yeah. Michael or Michael Haino.
Yeah, sometimes he's been anglicised, it's Michael, but quite often it's just spelled Michael, Michel. And we found where he's married an Irish girl, Edith O'Leary.
That's the tale that's told around the family kitchen table. My great-grandfather, Michael or Michael or Mikkel, sailed into the port of Liverpool and decided to stay, decided not to go back to Finland or Russia or Karelia or wherever it was that he came from.
When the Society of Genealogists was founded in 1911, the sources that were available were largely relating to middle and upper classes who had land and property, and you would find out about them through those that left wills and land records. And once the records that include the whole population, so the registration of birth, marriage and deaths from 1837 and the availability of the Victorian censuses from 1841 means that, in theory, everybody should be documented to some way, which means we have the possibility that everybody should be able to find out something about their family history. So it's mushroomed. And then the ability to search large chunks of data through the internet with the digitisation of things like the censuses online, newspapers online, huge numbers of church records becoming online through the internet. It means that you've got access to a vast amount of data out there. Not everything's on the internet, but enough is to get most people started.
Many of these websites seem to be tracking celebrity genealogies.
Of course. I mean, the only thing we're more obsessed with than genealogy is celebrities, right? So this is a bit of a marketing gimmick, right? So Ancestry.com and other companies are going to trace the ancestry of celebrities and try to entice you both with the stories of those celebrities, but also maybe you are related to Brad Pitt. Well, let me tell you something. You are related to Brad Pitt, and probably more recently than you think. I mean, we are all at least sort of 50th cousins is one way to think about this. A big deal was made about the fact that Dick Cheney and Barack Obama are relatives.
Did you know that? Was it a surprise?
You know, we'd kept it hidden. Mm-hmm. He's the black sheep in the family. You know,
because they're both descended from an American aristocrat who emigrated from France named Marine Duval. Well, tons and tons of other people are descended from Marine Duval. He happened to have a very successful progeny.
There's what you might call the gateway ancestor. In the idea of history and genealogy, that's normally somebody that's so well documented that their descendants are well known. In England, it's something like Edward III. I mean, we're all probably descended from Edward III. Isn't it nice to have royal ancestors? Well, millions of people are descended from Edward III. And so in that sense, that's where the connection might be. So the chances are an awful lot of people are distantly connected to each other.
But what does it say that Dick Cheney and Barack Obama are related? To me, it says almost nothing, because they couldn't have possibly had more different upbringings. Even both coming from the United States, they have vastly different cultural patrimonies that they're part of. And until they entered public life, there really was almost nothing in common between them. To me, the lesson there is that we're all related and that these differences between us are more sort of recent quirks of our geography.
I don't know Michael Heino. I have no feelings towards him other than curiosity, though some of his genes reside in me. But I don't really know why that matters, because families are complex things made up of more than just a bloodline.
I think I found him in an earlier census with the right woman being born in Finland, but not necessarily with the right name, and I'm wondering whether there was a clerical error in there. But based on that clue of him and one of the children being described as being in Finland, I had a look at some large international databases, and on the Family Search database, I found what I think is an interesting baptism of a Michael Heino at the right time, so maybe we could go and have a look at that.
Great.
Yeah. Just let me open up the Family Search database. When we looked at the censuses, we saw that Michael, he was 43 in 1911, which meant he was born around 1868, 1869. We found that there was one born in September 1869, and I had a look through the whole database, and there was no other Michaels around the right year at all. And he was christened the 12th of September 1869 in a place which I can't pronounce, but it looks like Ruokalahti, Viipuri, Finland.
I'm an adoptive father myself, so my children are not of my genetic stock. And to me, the very notion of genetic stock is inherently problematic.
But yet they do still sit on your family tree. It's not just about the genes. It's about the relationships between individual humans, whether they share blood or not.
I wish that were true. I think that many cases, especially more recently, an adopted person would be on a family tree with no asterisk or anything. But you'll see a lot of cases, especially if you go back a generation or two, where you'll see an asterisk or a circle around an adopted person, and then their children are not included in the family tree because this is not considered part of the legacy. So that's, of course, problematic as well. I mean, my children will grow up as Lentzes. They'll grow up on our clan, and of course my parents and my family have welcomed them as they have their other grandchildren, and that's great. But that's a relatively new way of looking at adoption. I think we need to keep that in mind as well. And it's a good way. It's a positive way. But I haven't had the discussion with my children, they're still young, about our family tree. To me, it's really brought home the emphasis on this genetic legacy rather than familial and cultural bonds.
What I think is so important is to be really cautious about an easy celebration of an idea of sharing ancestry, sharing a family tree, because you can easily just shift the scale to the scale of the nation or to a social group, and you start to say, well, if you share ancestry with me, we belong together. If we don't, then we don't belong together. And in the context of really heightened issues around national identity and migration and the treatment of people from different places in the world. It's really important to think about imagining a society that doesn't have to be divided up in terms of who's who belongs there, and for that to be about ancestry.
My ancestor, Michael Hino, married an Irish woman, but I don't know her fate. I do know that he died in an asylum in Liverpool, but I've no idea if he was a good man or a rogue.
We don't share that sin. I mean, we're not guilty of the sins of our fathers, but yet we still feel as though we are. We have a great shame. And I remember when my own family was researching their roots, and I was terrified myself of finding a slave owner in my ancestry. I don't know why, because it doesn't implicate me in slavery, but somehow the stain of that would still be felt. Now, we were very fortunate because we actually discovered the opposite. My ancestors were abolitionists. They were liberals in the Republican Party in central Illinois. They fought for the Union, all of this. But again, I took pride in this for something that I had no responsibility for, but I felt that pride. So there's something to this. There's something to the stories that we want to capture. But the fact is, we all share a relatively small set of ancestors a few generations back. So there are many odious men in all of our family trees. So you can't escape that. You can't escape the horrors of the past in terms of our ancestry.
So this is Michael Gustafsson Hino, is my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father. And these two names, which I've never seen before, Mats Gustafsson and Karin Srikanen, my great-great-grandparents, perhaps.
Potentially so. I think there's enough there to think that they may well be the next step in the next generation on your family tree.
And theoretically, if we can keep tracking them back, this database goes back to 1657. Baptisms in Finland.
Yes, and there's a marriage database as well. So the next thing to do would be to look for the marriage of Mats Gustafsson Hino and Karin Srikanen, and that would give you their ages at marriage and possibly the father's name. Enough information then to go on to look for the baptism of Mats and the baptism of Karin.
Why would I be interested?
Why would you be interested? Because they're part of what makes you you. It's an interesting detective story to try and work out, is it right? These are clues, I think they're the right ones, but I'd like to prove it. I'd like to make sure that I haven't just gone up the wrong family tree or just gone down the wrong line. And I'd be interested to know what family history and genealogy and social history in Finland will be like.
Thanks for listening to The Y Factor. There are many more episodes for you, like The Problem with Eyewitnesses, The Hoarders, Hidden Bias and Grief. You'll find those and more at bbcworldservice.com/yfactor.